Good morning. You're in the GAP session. The name of the GAP session is my activity implementation or capacity building? So my name is Gilbert Pasquale. I'm going to be presenting with Abigail Gilbert and Destiny Cooper. So we'll get started right now because we're on time.
So in the agenda and for this particular session, it is about, is the activity that you want to do or the one that you have, is it capacity building or is it implementation? There's some changes that have come up specifically and especially with the new GAP guidance. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. There's literally 2 slides of the more mundane, boring part, and the rest of it is literally going to be a game. So however fast we get through that, we're going to be taking questions throughout. So be prepared. You're going to have the chance to kind of see what it is that you do and don't know. Abby's going to go ahead and be going around with the other mic so that you'll have a chance to speak into the mic so that people online can hear your answers. And the people online, you'll have the chance to answer too. We're going to be pausing so that they can put their answers in the chat, and we'll find out what their answers are as well. Are you all ready to move forward? Okay, next slide, please. We're going to have candy to give out to those that answer first, too. So. It's okay. Since this site is still up, just know that for the game show, we're going to be covering everything but solid waste, because solid waste under GAP, you can do both capacity building and implementation. So it gets a little hairy when we talk about solid waste for this. Okay. This is about defining what implementation is under the new GAP guidance. And instead of me totally going through this and reading everything to you, you'll have this presentation as a reference for you. So it will be available. The thing that I want to highlight in here is specifically how the new guidance is defining implementation. So that's the part that's in italics. Once a tribe is administering an EPA program, activities performed in the assumed program area are implementation activities for the purpose of GAP. So I just want to let that sink in for a second. So once a program is delegated, the activities associated with that program are then considered implementation activities. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And of course, there's exceptions to things. So this is a slide that's all about the exceptions to that. How do we accommodate exceptions? How do we make exceptions? What's the process for exceptions? This is the part of the GAP guidance that goes over that. So there's a few things to highlight under here. If you have a delegated program, but say, for example, under the Clean Water Act, you have a new parameter to test for, that might be an exception where you can do some of that work under GAP. If there's a new land parcel, that's the example that's used under 1, and you're wanting to start adding them to part of what you're doing for your delegated programs, that's an exception. And then for PPGs, for 2, it does mention that there's like approved regulatory flexibilities. And I'll have in the notes area for this presentation where you can find like those flexibilities listed in the CFR. I know it's a citation, so I'm not going to worry about saying it right now. Nobody's going to remember it. And then the third one under here is about being able to do additional activities, how we go ahead and get approval to do additional activities specifically under those programs that are delegated. So internally within the program, within Region 9, we would have to go to AIO to get approval for that. So the guidance actually lays out a process for us to do to make that happen. It means that when you have a delegated program and you still, for whatever reason, want to do capacity building work, and you want to do it with GAP funds, it may take a little bit longer for us to get approval, but there's a process for us to try to make that happen. And then the last one, it talks about there being implementation work under solid waste being eligible. So the thing that I'll remind folks is that yes, it was documented as eligible work under the original statute. This isn't just talking about that, it's also talking about the modifications or the approvals that were made under the recent, well, recent in terms of federal timeline, but recent in the sense of there's more stuff that we can do as far as implementation. So that's actually referring to both those updates as well as the original GAP statute with that number 4. Okay, so this is the boring part. Now we're gonna go into the actual game. You guys ready to play a game? Okay, it's early morning. We thought we'd, get you guys going here with some candy and with an actual game. You wanna go into the next slide? Who wants to pick the first one? All you have to do is pick one of these topics and we'll go from there. Hold on for the mic. And when you get the mic, just go ahead and say your name, please.
Tanya Williamson, EPA specialist, emergency response.
Okay, we'll click on that one. So grantee suddenly has to meet with others regarding emergency planning and management. Do you think, so the question's at the bottom. So is this kind of activity capacity building, implementation, or does it need more information? And you don't have to answer. Does anybody have an answer? Go ahead and raise your hand if you think you know. And for the people online, please put your answer in the chat. I saw the hand up over there in the corner. You want to put your hand up again? Yeah. Yeah. Don't say it just yet. Mark?
Need more information.
Oh, okay. So it is, do you want to go ahead and press the space? This is capacity building. So this kind of activity is considered capacity building on its own and is no longer restricted under the new GAP guidance. If this activity isn't already in your work plan, go ahead and get a hold of your GAP project officer and we can figure out how to change or amend your work plan to get it in there, but it is considered a capacity building activity. One of the things that I'll note though, is that there are certain pieces of emergency response that aren't considered capacity building, not because of it being under emergency response, but because we still have to tag things back to the statutory authorities that EPA deals with as a whole. So the GAP guidance does refer to that in a few of the pages.
Can I add something, Destiny?
Oh.
So just for some context, if you ever find yourself in a position where, say, in your tribe, you're wearing a lot of hats and you have to suddenly start attending these meetings and you want to know if GAP can fund that, then it absolutely is eligible. You can put that in your work plan. And like Destiny said, it may not be eligible to fund developing an entire work, emergency response plan, but you should be funded for that time that you're spending. And you should put that in your GAP work plan.
So if you want to go home, okay. So who got the answer the last time or who guessed the answer? Let's go ahead and have you pick the next one.
TEK.
Okay. All right, for the people online, if you want to start reading this and putting your answers in the chat. So provide stipends to elder environmental advisory council members from whom tribe gathers environmental knowledge for outreach and education activities. Raise your hand if you think you know the answer of if this is implementation, capacity building, or needs more information. It's over here.
I'm coming around.
So just so everybody knows, this isn't wasted time. The people online are getting the chance to actually write their answer. Okay.
That was
Implementation.
Go ahead and press space. Capacity building. So this kind of expense is considered participant support costs. And again, in the notes for this slide presentation, I'll have citations so that you can find out what the definition is of that. And it is to be reviewed and considered as any other expense would be. So the expense does need to be associated with work in the work plan, and the expense needs to be comparable for work completed. For example, you wouldn't do like $60,000 for a single presentation, but something in a different range. Great, there's questions. So we're here first.
I was just wondering what funding category the stipends would go in. Would it go under personnel or something else?
That actually tends to be up to the tribal policy. I've seen it get both. I've seen tribes put it in other, and they've put it under personnel costs. And sometimes I've even seen it under contractual. So we tend to follow, if you guys let us know what your policy is, we'll follow what your policy says. And there is certain categories that we tend, there are categories that grant specialists say that it should be in, but if the tribe has a different policy than that, we'll follow that so long as we know. And there's a few other questions on this side.
So I just have a follow-up question. So if it provides stipend, that seems to me that that's like after the fact. So the verbiage doesn't sound like it's capacity building to me.
What makes it capacity building is the work that's being done in association with it. So the fact that they're communicating with the elder in order to get the knowledge for the purpose of outreach and education activities, that work is what is actually designating it as capacity building. It's not the stipend part itself. It's not when exactly the stipend is given. It's the work associated with what's happening with it. And there was a question in the back.
It's more of a statement. If you're planning on doing this, there is a cap at what you can stipend your TEK advisors. I know some of us are used to paying TEK like it's lump sum amount, but I believe the hourly rate is $25. Is that right, Julianne? $25? Do you remember? For the TEK advisors.
That goes back to how you categorize it. So it does have to, there is some restrictions and it's actually already existing on everybody's grant. There's a standard term and condition about how much you can pay contractors. And that's what that's referring to. So again, if you guys have as a tribe a policy for what category it goes into, the grant specialist and your PO would probably want to talk to you all about how you're grouping it, because that what you're talking about specifically in terms of the max may or may not apply depending on that policy and the category it goes in. I'm liking that there's a lot of questions. This is good.
So Ryan Eberly from Gila River. Can I go back to the last one about attending those meetings real quick?
It's going to be really hard for us to do it on the
That's
slide.
okay.
But
You
can
don't
go
need
ahead
to.
and refer
I don't
back to
think
it,
you need to go back to that. But there was a comment made by if we have to start attending those meetings, those are eligible for gap funding. I'm already employed, so if I have to attend those meetings, what good does it do me to try to get coverage from gap at that point? The challenge that I think many tribes face is that there's all these things that need to be done. They need a person like in the future, so they have to like plan that stuff out. So I think from the point of it being eligible for gap, that's a great comment, and I think that's helpful for tribes to be able to plan that in the future. Hey, am I going to have to attend meetings? But again, we need more staff, and that's kind of the bottom line, is with all the things that we're being required or that we want to do, we need more staff to do them. So like going back and saying, okay, well, if I'm already funded by a grant or by a tribe at this point, it doesn't do me any good to go back and spend all this admin time to try to increase my gap percentage currently. It's more like in the future, I need a whole FTE, because if I need to, I can't do more capacity building or do more work unless I have a whole FTE, not a part of an FTE, to bring on more staff.
So there's the immediate answer of if something comes up like right now. So say in your existing work plan, there's nothing related to it, but there's a fire that happens or there's a flood that occurs. There's a question of how does it get funded right now if somebody's fully funded by GAP? And then there's a question of if you see it continuing past then yes, by all means, that's an additional conversation to have with your PO for the planning part to project out, so that something like FTE could be added, so that other expenses could be added too. But there's the immediate answer of how do you get it into your work plan? How do you make sure that it's covered right here, right now when it happens? And then there's a question of how do you get it covered moving forward? And those are kind of dealt with a little bit separately and differently. More questions? Okay. If we can go back to the person with the original answer, or whoever wants to pick the next one, if we want to go home. So we got 4 more left on this one. Does anybody want to pick one? Hold on.
Air one.
That's not Air 1. We'll do this one instead. We'll just go ahead and do this one. So we'll go back to the Air 1 here in a minute. So this one is actually the Clean Water Act one. So the tribe requests to buy a boat. Does this need more information? Is it capacity building or is it implementation? Somebody raise their hand. Don't all shout it. I saw that hand up first over there.
Needs more information.
Yes, thank you. So this one needs more information, like what work in the work plan the boat will be used for, and assuming that work is associated, the work that's associated is eligible under GAP, then it could be funded. So it may be that the purpose of the boat is actually cutting across multiple programs, and in that case, it may be that you need like a cost allocation strategy. But if the only purpose of it is specifically related to GAP work that's eligible, then it could be fully funded by GAP. Other questions about that one? So let's go home and see if we can try that Air 1 thing again. And click down there. There it is. Okay. So since this one already has the answer up, but it says behind it is grantee requests to use purple air monitors for initial air quality screening after having an approved QAP. And the answer for it is capacity building, specifically because the prompt includes the word initial. So that's what makes it capacity building work. So it implies that very initial set of information. Want to go home? Okay. So is anybody, we're going to do Air 2? Okay. So we're going to click on that one. All right. So a tribe with an air monitoring program delegation wants to do air program related outreach and education activities. Is this capacity building, implementation, or does it need more information? By race?
I'm going to guess implementation.
Yes. So this one is implementation to start with because it says that they have the delegated program. So like the first few slides showed, there is a way for us to get it approved to still be done under GAP. But to start with, it is considered implementation, and then we go from there. Are there questions about this one? Hold on.
Question mark. I guess someone's asking why it's not capacity building.
It doesn't start off as capacity building because of the fact that the tribe has the delegated program. So the fact that they're wanting to do it as part of outreach and education, that piece is capacity building work. But the fact that they have the delegated program starts it as implementation, and then we can talk about going in and seeking an AIO approval to do the work anyway under GAP. Yeah, if you want to go home. The last one is the pesticides. So the grantee wants to conduct pesticides program inspections. Is this capacity building, implementation, or does it need more information? There's an answer over here.
Capacity building.
Go ahead. Yes. So this one is capacity building because the pesticides program is under a statute that with the acronym FIFRA. Don't ask me right now while I'm up here what that stands for. I can answer that later when I'm not up front. But this is capacity building because that program doesn't include the authority to delegate it out. And this grantee doesn't, I mean, clearly they don't have the delegation since we can't do that. Granted, tribes can go ahead and seek to have, they can be certified to do the inspections, but that doesn't mean that they have the full delegated program. There's pieces of it that still go back to the agency for us to actually do the enforcement part of it, depending on whether it's a tribal ordinance or the federal side that actually is what they're not obeying. And I think Julianne wanted to add something to
Um,
that first.
Can we? Yeah.
Okay.
You did go first, but you're right here. So.
I just have a question. Can you give me an example of why a tribe would want to do pesticide program inspections? Like, is it because there's a factory next door or something like that?
Usually that can be one. It can be that they have a large ag land. So they could have multiple farms in their land. There's several reasons, and we do have several of them within the region that are doing this. So there's another comment in the back.
I used to work in the pesticide program under the FIFRA program. So a lot of, sometimes tribes have concerns about pesticide misuse. So, and that could be, could be drift from agriculture, or it could be just structural applications and concerns about that. So there's lots of reasons that people want to make sure that people are applying pesticides legally and in a safe way, or to reduce risk is what we wouldn't say safe, we say reduce risk. I just want to say, I think, and let me know if I'm wrong, but in the old GAP guidance, this would be considered implementation, but with the new GAP guidance, this is now considered capacity building. So just wanted to hone in on that point that with the new GAP guidance, there's a lot more activities that can be funded.
Yes.
Oh yeah, this is to add to the pesticide conversation. Jefferson M says, we have an agricultural runoff that goes back into the river upstream from the reservation. This is why I'm interested in a pesticide program. People swim and fish in this water.
So we can go ahead and get him connected to the pesticides folks. And I don't know which tribe he's from, but we can also set up a conversation with him. And
if you have pesticides on hand that are being used on tribal lands, that you want to be able to inspect those pesticides to make sure that storage is correct, no restricted use chemicals on hand, applicator license, etc.
so that's another reason to be able to do the inspections. So I think from here, if we just want to move the slide forward, because we're going to do round 2. Okay, this is it. Good. Perfect. They're coming from the back with the mic.
Destiny, hi, good morning. My name is Africa Avalos. I manage the pesticide program for the Intertribal Council of Arizona. And I'm so glad you brought up this slide because working with tribes in Arizona that don't have pesticide programs in place but do have GAP funding, this is always the question, like how can they use GAP funding to do other type of activities under medias like FIFRA or solid waste, et cetera, air. And so my understanding was, and I just want to confirm, my understanding is that GAP funds can only be used for program implementation, not inspections. I just want to.
So that's a change that happened with the new GAP guidance. That's why that's why we're doing this, is because it did get a lot broader in terms of what can be done under GAP now with the 22 guidance. So the way you're talking and the way you're referring, that's the old guidance.
Okay.
And this is what's now happening with the new guidance.
And so when that is done, so say a tribe does not have a pesticide program in place, but has a GAP program in place, what do they use as reference to enforce and do inspections?
So I would say the first step is for them to talk to us, and we will actually coordinate a sort of a startup call, a startup conversation with a pesticides contact, us and them, to figure out where they should be starting first. My guess is that it may be a little bit different for each tribe, given what it is that they're trying to do, what they're wanting to do, as in what is the concern, versus what authority we would have. And then maybe the place to start is with an ordinance. Maybe the place to start is to have us actually go out and at least do the first initial set of inspections. It just depends on what the specific details are.
Okay. What would be the end goal? Because the authority would be under tribal law, not under FIFRA. So it would be
There's-
a tribal ordinance or regulation they would be enforcing. So I'm curious as to what authority EPA would have over the inspections.
I would almost say that we would probably want to connect you with some of the tribes that are currently doing it, because there's multiple answers to the question that you're
Gotcha.
asking.
Yeah.
So yeah, we may want to have a side conversation about this one.
We have a comment from Heather Bartlett saying that ITEP has a pesticide program to help tribes with their programs. Mark Daniels is our program director for the pesticide program. So yeah, just know that the resources out there for you too to develop this.
More questions, comments? Lisa, hold on for the.
I just wanted to make a comment, and I promised Destiny I'd be quiet. I'm not answering the question. But the new GAP guidance also allows for the maintenance of capacity to be included. And there's a new area in the guidance that we identify as meaningful participation. So if a tribe isn't looking to develop a delegated program, or there's not an opportunity like in FIFRA for a delegated program, then we consider meaningful participation as how they're participating. And if a tribe is implementing a program under their own laws, codes, and ordinances, that is an allowable cost to maintain that as meaningful participation.
And we're going to go over meaningful participation in this set. So we will be touching on that here shortly. Okay, who wants to pick the first one up here? Raise your hand. She'll bring the mic to you.
GIS.
A grantee with TAS approval to operate regulatory program seeks to use GIS to map all past and present water sampling locations. Is this capacity building implementation, or does it need more information? Who has an answer out here? Daryl?
I would say it's capacity building.
Good. This is implementation because of the note about TAS and having delegation. So if the tribe did not already have the TAS for this program, the activity would be thought of as just capacity building. Like I noted during the last round, this can end up being approved if we go for that grantee to AIO to seek an exception or to seek approval to go ahead and do this capacity building work. But because of that note in parentheses, it's specifically considered implementation. Are there questions about this? Okay, go home. Daryl, you want to pick the next one? Did it? Okay. Just go ahead and go to round 2. Keep going forward. This is one of the issues with the slides. Daryl's going to pick the next one.
Air 3.
You like the air ones. So tribe requests to buy an electric vehicle for outreach and education. Is this capacity building? Does it need more information?
Hand, please. Oh, sorry. Anybody?
I'm going to go with needs more information on that one.
That's right. So this prompt requires additional information such as whether the electric vehicle will only be used for GAP activities and only GAP outreach and education, as well as the frequency of the GAP outreach and education activity, the frequency of the activity, and how else the vehicle would be used between the activity or activities. But all of that's related to whether or not that purchase would be allocable specifically to GAP, and then reasonableness of it, and is there a need to do something like a cost allocation strategy if other programs are using it too. So with this one, I think you can press the back button. Yeah. So because of the error I think that's happening with the slides, let's just go ahead and do NEPA. We'll go through these kind of in order. Okay, a grantee requests to participate in meetings with local, county, and state entities for the purpose of knowing which NEPA documents to provide environmental comments on and who to collaborate with on which documents, both at the tribe and externally. Is that capacity building? Does it need more information, or is it implementation? Somebody want to guess? So the answer from the audience was capacity building for those that are online.
Thank you for volunteering.
Go ahead and yes, please. So capacity building it is. This NEPA related activity is considered meaningful participation. The eligibility of this activity was made clearer under the new GAP guidance and is eligible work. One important note about this prompt is the inclusion of environmental for the comments, because we know that there's a ton of possible comments that can be given, but it's very specific about being environmentally related. Are there questions about this one? I'd go and press the back button. You're gonna have to go back a few times on this one. Yeah. So the grantee requests to draft a climate change adaptation plan. Capacity building, implementation, or does it need more information? And Mark has the mic in the middle if you have an answer.
Hand, please. No.
Anybody want to guess?
Capacity.
That's right. So plans are gap eligible work when associated with even a non-delegated program and EPA statutes and executive orders. So pretty much every plan we hear about can be done under GAP. So this is definitely capacity building work. And climate change, I know, is a very big hot topic. So this can be done. Go ahead and press the forward button. We're going to go through them in order. So this one is specifically related to collaborations and partnerships. A tribe wants to discuss with EPA updates to the lead abatement program when they have TAS for the program. Is this implementation, capacity building, or does it need more information? Raise your hand. So different.
Implementation.
Yes. So that note at the end about the TAS. So although this is characterized as meaningful participation, the tribe having delegation for the lead abatement program makes it implementation work. And again, Region 9 can go back to IEO to seek approval for the tribe to do it. Anyway, under GAP, because it's really capacity building if it wasn't for the TAS delegation. So again, skip forward. Okay, so this is the last one. So this is on the slide, it was pesticides 2. Grantee wants to conduct a baseline needs assessment to gather information that will eventually be used to test drive pesticides inspections. Is this capacity building, implementation, or does it need more information?
Capacity building.
This one needs more information. So although generally approvable, there's a few notes about this prompt. Given the change to the definition of implementation for the purpose of GAP eligible activities, test drives are no longer an option under GAP, specifically because we can go ahead and do more things under GAP. That phrasing, test drives, was taken out of the 2022 guidance. For this prompt, a tribe can conduct pesticides inspections under GAP, as this isn't a program that can be fully delegated to a tribe. More information is needed about what kind of parameters and information will be tested for in the baseline needs assessment, how the information will be gathered, and a determination of whether a QAP is needed. So there's a few steps that have to happen first before they can actually jump in on this one. Are there questions about any of this? I think I ran through the last ones pretty quickly. Can you tell what a QAP is? So QAP is a quality assurance program plan. Project plan, thank you. So it's the thing that you basically follow in order to get your samples, and it's something that a grantee would draft and gets approval from our quality assurance office, and it does get tagged back to a specific program. So you can draft CLAPs, get them approved under GAP, and then either those same CLAPs can be used specifically for work under GAP, or they can be used under other programs that you're getting funding for from the agency. Anything else? If not, we may have finished 10 minutes early.
I have to work for it and I have to stand up. I didn't exercise this morning. I really appreciate the presentation, Destiny, and members of the team who helped contribute. And I like the way that these questions illuminate that under the newly issued GAP guidance, there has been an expansion in the flexibilities. One of the things I just wanted to note for folks who might have a more tuned in ear, having TAS treatment as a state or in a manner similar to a state is a really specific thing that can look different from program to program. And I think in these slides, we used having TAS as a shortcut to hint you have delegated program authority, but those are actually sort of, two items on a spectrum. So I think that the takeaway message that I'd like to make sure that folks understand is there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of expanded flexibilities that have been created through the new GAP guidance, and that guidance was derived by conversations and information from tribes to the American Indian Environmental Office. But if you've got questions about how far you can stretch it, talk to your project officer and they can talk through your unique examples. I wouldn't want folks to feel like, oh, I heard I heard that this isn't eligible, and think that the answer is automatically no. So there's a lot of room for creativity, and project officers, Destiny included, are here to help you think about the ways that you can use GAP to achieve your goals. And I'm sorry, the stickler in me just couldn't help it. TAS is a shortcut. We use it because we think like nudge, nudge, that means delegated program authority, but it's not quite so precise. There's just not enough room on the slide to say exactly what I was trying to describe.
I was thinking about the last slide with the lead abatement and the TAS, and
Yes.
I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that a little bit, because I think of lead abatement as waste, and I think at the very beginning you said there was some caveat about the waste. This doesn't apply to waste programs.
You are right. I wanted to specifically make sure that that one was in there though, because it is one of the programs that is starting to pop up again. So because it's starting to pop up in various places around our region, we just wanted to highlight it really quick. A, the tribe can get delegation for it. B, it can be dealt with, and there's ways to still do that work under GAP. So there was a mixture of reasons why we included it the way we did, but you are right that in the end, that one does end up going down the waste avenue on the hindsight of things. Okay.
Oh, I got
Yeah, and we'll definitely be able to find a way to get to yes. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do now, like where Laura was saying, we have lots of room and flexibility, and talk with your project officer. But the way the GAP statute is written, where it talks about solid waste implementation, it specifically says consistent with RCRA, what we now call RCRA. And I don't think lead abatement is defined under RCRA. I think it's under a different statute. So it wouldn't fall into the approvable solid and hazardous waste implementation component, but it would still be ways that we could do the lead abatement under GAP as appropriate.
Hi. Say a tribe wanted to start a wildfire fuels reduction team and needed training for that team. Would workforce training be a capacity building and education exercise under GAP?
So this is where we start saying we probably need to sit down for more detail. I've seen them both get approved depending upon exactly what the training is and how it's described and how it's otherwise worked with. And I've seen a few of them that we haven't been able to approve under GAP. So it just that's one that depends on the details and the nitty gritty of what like the specific training is, because there's several of them out there. So unfortunately, this is one of those that it depends. Any other raising of hands? We have one more in the back.
I just wanted to congratulate EPA on a much better guidance document, and because I see it as way more flexible. Lisa Barrios, thank you. I know you led that charge because I was in I was in on part of that with you. But what I really appreciate, and hopefully the folks that are new, is finding a way to yes is what I heard her say, and that's the most important thing. That's why really appreciated that question before, because if your project officer can't figure a way to say yes, Laura, you got your Laura will help. Thank you guys. Thank you, Lisa.
Any other questions, comments?
So this kind of goes back to the vehicle, the electric vehicle. So when you do get a vehicle, and I know, let's see, so if you applied for grants under GAP, like environmental justice, whatever kind of grants like that, you can use that vehicle. Can you still use that vehicle to go to carry out the other grant that you receive, like the environmental justice grant and other grants, because that's kind of where we're at. Like they all relate to environmental, but
It's a this gets down to sort of the nitty gritty of the details of how federal dollars are managed and not just about GAP. When you have a purchase of an equipment under GAP, if it's an open grant, and the caveat is if it's an open grant, then if that vehicle is fully purchased with GAP funds, then it's only supposed to be getting used for those GAP funds. Now, granted, if you have a PPG, there's an asterisk to that. So if you have a PPG, instead of taking my answer just at face value, I would talk to your PO first about this. But if you're in a standalone grant, then trying to use it for any of the other programs, even if they're from EPA, that's no. So you would wait until that GAP grant that you purchased the vehicle under. Once it's closed, it goes under a different set of the regulations about how that vehicle basically is kept by the tribe to be used with other federal programs. So it could be used for GAP, it can be used for all of them. But if you don't have the cost allocation strategy when you first purchase the vehicle across those programs, that's how it works. And you can talk to your PO about how to set that up or how to work with that if you have a PPG or if you're trying to do a cost allocation strategy, because I realize the dollars under all these programs, some of them at the moment are really big, some of them are still kind of small, but you can kind of figure out what that cost allocation strategy may look like.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not seeing any more questions or hands. I think we're going to end a few minutes early, and there is another session in here. I believe we have a break next for the whole conference, and then we'll start again. What time? Okay, 10:30 is the next session. I'm wrong about the break. Okay. So there is another session in this for GAP right after.